Everything that you see on social media is not even 1%. I saw a child that had her face burned pretty much all the way through while she was being carried outside of Al-Aqsa hospital, and she was in like an intense amount of pain and would not stop crying because of the amount of pain that she was in. So it was mesmerizing to see, a child suffering like that and no ability to help her.
And could you guys hear the drones?
Oh, that's an endless noise. You hear it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you know when they're about to hit because you start hearing two of them, and they start circling right above your head or right near the area that you're at, and then you hear whoosh, and it comes in very quickly, and you hear the explosion of the bomb that just went off. The house we were staying in actually did get attacked. Like the periphery of that house did get attacked.
As a Palestinian, what would you like to see for your people? A one-state solution, a two-state solution? Do you think you could ever live with the Israelis after what has been done?
Today I'm honored to sit down with Dr. Assaf, a Palestinian-American physician and activist who's emerged as a bold voice for Palestinian human rights. Like most Palestinians, Assaf's life is shaped by the Nakba. His great-grandfather was forcibly expelled from Jaffa during Israel's ethnic cleansing in 1948, later settling in East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood amid decades of struggle against encroaching settlers. Raised in the US after his father immigrated, Assaf trained as a doctor, but never abandoned his roots, fueled by a fierce commitment to justice and dignity for his people. Yet Assaf's story goes beyond heritage. It's one of action. In spring of 2024, he risked his life to provide medical care in Gaza during the genocide, treating patients under unimaginable conditions. And upon his return, he continued to risk his career as speaking out about Palestine as a medical professional has jeopardized the licenses and livelihoods of many doctors here in America. But that hasn't stopped Assaf from dismantling Zionist arguments or sharing critical information about Palestine on X. The conversation you're about to witness is about courage, identity, and tragedy, and includes personal stories from Gaza during the height of the genocide. So, without further ado, let's dive in with Dr. Assaf.
Crazy, which is smart, you shouldn't put yourself at risk. So,
well, the standard has shifted, I guess.
Yeah.
This was kind of a death sentence a few years ago.
Yeah. So you went to medical school in the islands, huh? You went to Barbados?
Ross in Barbados, but when I went there, it was in Dominica, and then we got hit with a hurricane in 2017.
Which hurricane was that?
I think it was called Hurricane Maria.
Okay. Oh, that's the one that wrecked Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
That was a really powerful
one. It went through those chain of islands and then destroyed Puerto Rico. Before it hit Puerto Rico, it hit our island. So me and my brothers, ended up relocating to Tennessee.
So you and your brothers were in medical school together?
We all went to med school together.
How many brothers?
Two other brothers.
Wow, three of you guys together. Are you guys like all triplets or? No, just close in age?
Yeah, well, there's like a year and a half, 2 years between each of us, and they did I did my master's while they finished undergrad, and Abdullah, the youngest one, is graduated college very early.
Okay, mashallah. So you guys all grew up in Illinois, in Chicago?
Yeah, the south side.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Bridgeview, Orland Park-ish area.
Yeah, and then you guys all went to medical school together, got slammed by a hurricane, and then you finished up in Tennessee. How did that work?
So they relocated the university to another campus that was being built for a medical school in Tennessee. So we spent like 9 months there for our preclinical years, just doing our basic science training at that campus, and then we went off and did our rotations. So we went to Mount Sinai, we went to California Hospital Medical Center, we went to Cleveland Clinic in Florida, and then we graduated eventually.
Okay, nice. And your family's from Palestine originally. You said your father from a village near Nablus and your mother from Jaffa originally.
Yeah, so my family was from both of those areas. My mom was born in the United States but raised in Jerusalem, and my dad spent all of his life pretty much outside of Palestine. He was raised in Kuwait. But your grandfather is from Sheikh Jarrah? He lives in Sheikh Jarrah? So when they were expelled from Jaffa, they ended up in a village just outside of Ramallah for probably just about a year, and then decided to relocate to Sheikh Jarrah. He wanted to live closer to a bigger city, so we found more opportunity there to rebuild after everything that he lost. And then that's where they ended up.
Mm. And were they, this is your grandfather or your great-grandfather?
My great-grandfather.
Your great-grandfather.
Yeah.
Is he still alive?
No, he passed away in 2003.
Allah yarhamu. And so do you have any family that still lives in Sheikh Jarrah now?
Yeah. His children, which are my grandma's brothers, live in that house still.
Okay. And so they were there during, the flashpoint, the Sheikh Jarrah,
Yeah.
all that craziness.
Yeah, they've been there and they're still there.
So you went to Gaza
Mm-hmm.
in April of 2024.
In mid-March until April 1st.
So you were there for about 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
And so that was almost a year ago at this point, like 10 months.
Yeah.
9 months, actually. It's almost March 1st.
Yeah.
So you went to Gaza. Who did you go with?
I went with an organization called GLIA. I put it out on my social media that I was interested to go to Gaza, and a few people connected me with one of the directors of that organization, and he helped arrange for me to go to Gaza with the group.
What is this group, GLIA? How is it spelled? What does it stand for?
GLIA. It's a humanitarian organization that's been working in Gaza for about 10 years, I think. So they had been pre-existing in Gaza before all of this started on October 7th. So, we went with like a group of 12 doctors, some nurses, and some other staff that were with us too.
So you tweet this out. You just say, I want to volunteer. I'm a doctor. I'm practicing currently. What kind of medicine actually do you practice?
Internal medicine.
Internal medicine. Okay.
Yeah.
So you put it out there, and then they found you, and they said, would you like to go?
Someone actually gave me his phone number, like a random anonymous account. And I thought it was like a phishing thing, but I messaged him on WhatsApp. I was out of the country at that time. I was in Costa Rica. So I just sent off that message, and he's like, my name is X, and, I'm the head of the GLIA organization. If you're interested in going to Gaza, send me your CV and your medical license and all that stuff, and we can help arrange if you're interested in going. So he messaged me back like 2 days later, and then I came back early from Costa Rica and made my arrangements to go 2 weeks later.
So which route did you guys take to get into Gaza, and what was that like?
So I flew to Germany, and from Germany to Cairo. I spent a couple days in Cairo the weekend before we left. I connected with some of the other physicians that were going in on the trip with us into Gaza, and they were kind of arranging all these supplies to bring in with us, water, food, and mostly medicine. A lot of these doctors kind of used their own money to buy all this medication from random pharmacies in Cairo. So we were running around Cairo just collecting all these different types of medicine, insulin, and putting them in freeze-dried bags and getting everything prepared so we can cross over into Gaza.
So you guys spent a couple days in Cairo collecting medicine, getting yourself situated, getting ready to go in. How many bags were you guys taking with you?
A lot. I think we took like 50 bags.
50 large, like 50-pound suitcase bags, just jam-packed with supplies.
2 truck worths of 2 like big vans worth of bags. We had to put them on the roof. We had to leave some stuff behind, actually. The second group that went after us took the rest of the stuff.
So you guys went to Rafah?
Yeah, we crossed over into Rafah. I think it was a Monday. And we manually brought in all the stuff with us, crossed through the Egyptian side, crossed through the Palestinian side, and then some of the handlers on the inside from the Gaza side came and picked us up.
Now, this was before Israel took over the Rafah crossing, right?
Yeah, this was like, I want to say 6 or 8 weeks before they went into Rafah.
So who was manning the border at the time?
It was Palestinians. Yeah, it was Palestinian, just like border control people. They stamped our passport and everything.
Did you see any Hamas?
I didn't personally.
Were there any like security, police?
I saw as soon as
I know everyone in Gaza is Hamas, but
Yeah, so apparently that's the story. So they had border police that wasn't armed. They were just like, what we would consider here in the United States like a Homeland Security type people that stamped our passport and brought us through customs. And then the first time I saw a person with a gun was one guy was sitting on top of a shipment of aid that was crossing outside of like the entrance into the to the main road that goes into Rafah. And that's one of the only times that I actually saw someone with a weapon.
So the guy with the weapon is basically just protecting the aid from people who might rob it and try to sell it.
Yeah, it's actually this. I recognize him as that same guy from the photo that they use in every single news article. The guy with the cap on and the AK-47 just sitting in the front of the truck. It looked just like that guy. I want to say it's the same person, but it is the same exact scenario. One guy sitting on top of the truck with a couple people in the back just guarding the aid, and they were going through.
So which hospital, did you guys get split up, all 12 of you, or did you go to the same hospital?
So we stayed in the same house, but a few of us were different types of specialties. We had a pediatric specialist and one emergency room doctor that was comfortable dealing with pediatric patients. So they went into one of the pediatric hospitals in Rafah. Two of us went to, or three of us actually ended up going to one of the clinics in Rafah in Tell Sultan. And then a couple people worked at Aqsa Hospital and what is it called? Abu Yusuf al-Najjar Hospital, which is a small, like, ancillary hospital in Rafah.
So all of you were based in Rafah, basically.
Yeah, we couldn't get much north of that.
So you were at this clinic in Rafah,
Mm-hmm.
and what were you doing? What was it like?
It was absolute chaos. I mean, people all around. The sewage was in the streets, underfunded, undersupplied, hundreds of patients everywhere, and not enough people to take care of them.
Was the clinic ever attacked, like the nearby areas while you were there?
The house we were staying in actually did get attacked. Like the periphery of that house did get attacked.
By what?
They just dropped what I assume to be a missile near those areas. They actually had to move us out of that house towards the middle of the second week because the frequency and intensity of the bombings got significant. So they put us at the Indonesian field hospital in Tell Sultan to stay there for the remainder of our mission.
So when you were in the clinic, how many hours a day were you working?
We worked from basically just after sunup to sundown. They didn't want us traveling after sundown. So after the clinic closed and everything, finished up for the day, we just went back to where we were staying, to the house we were staying in.
And what exactly were you doing at this hospital?
So in the clinic, we were basically dealing with, my personal role was dealing with like primary care patients, patients who are adults that had chronic illnesses that didn't have access to primary care physicians because of the, what was happening. They had a small triage area for patients who came in for very basic wounds, removing sutures for people. And then they had other specialists there, like cardiologists and nephrologists and stuff like that, so they can see patients that, don't require going to the hospital but need long-term management of their chronic conditions.
So they say that a lot of the people who died in Gaza didn't necessarily die directly because of being shot or killed or bombed. Mm-hmm. They died because of a complete collapse of the healthcare industry. And so or healthcare system, I should say. Mm-hmm. And so people with these chronic illnesses would die. Let's say if you needed a dialysis because you needed a kidney transplant, mm-hmm. or you have cancer, or whatever the case is, basic treatment can no longer be provided consistently. And so people were dying because of that. So is that something that you noticed?
Yeah. I mean, there's like a certain percentage of people in any modern healthcare system that pass away from chronic or from what we think are not as acute illnesses. So, a certain percent of people die from pneumonia. This is just how medicine is. People get very sick from a pneumonia and then they pass away. But there's a certain percentage of people who survive it. And I want to say the vast majority of people who who get a pneumonia end up surviving a pneumonia. But people were having heart attacks, people were getting pneumonia. Simple illnesses that brought people to the hospital would result in them passing away because they don't have access to antibiotics, they don't have access to the medicines that require to support these people through those illnesses that happen. So all the stuff that you see in a regular healthcare system in the United States or in Europe, all these illnesses that come into the emergency department get triaged and patients get sent to the floor. A lot of those patients did not get any care in Gaza, and a lot of them ended up passing away. I mean, if you destroy all the hospitals, you destroy all the infrastructure to support the healthcare system, you destroy the ambulances and everything related to the healthcare system, and people start dying as a result of that, I would attribute those deaths that were preventable. If somebody has a heart attack and can't go to the cath lab, for example, and you destroyed the cath lab, that's you're responsible for that death in one way or another. And if 100,000 people population experiences these acute illnesses and come in and you destroyed that infrastructure, I would say that responsibility lies on you. It's just a logical conclusion, I think.
So normally when you go to a hospital, you have nurses, you have somebody managing the floor, assigning people to certain tasks, you have notes, you're able to visit a patient and there's a lot of people taking care of that patient and you have a lot of history and you know everything you need to know before you treat them. But you're going into Gaza and you're just being assigned to a random clinic. So what was that like? I mean, getting there and trying to figure out who am I treating and what is their history and, just dealing with a lack of information.
Yeah, it was so busy. We did not have any time to kind of work up the patients or evaluate them in a extensive way. It was mostly very superficial care, I would say. But when I was in Abu Yusuf al-Najjar, I worked in the emergency department there as well. They just don't have access to the supplies. They did not have access to the supplies needed to take care of those patients. I mean, they had very basic amounts of antibiotics, 2 antibiotics. We have hundreds of antibiotics to treat patients here. People would get an infection, cellulitis of the leg, or someone would have some type of pneumonia, and you just don't have the medicine to send them home with or to treat them inpatient with it. When I went to Al-Aqsa Hospital, for example, the ICU, they had 1 blood pressure support medication. We call them pressors. They're used to hold up people's blood pressure if they're septic or if they're in some sort of circulatory shock. And they had access to one. In the United States and Europe, there are at least 3 pressors that are available to use for patients in certain clinical scenarios, sometimes 4. Under the right circumstances, and I was just stunned that, they only had 1. And I talked to the ICU doctor there, and I was like, when you're maxed out on that first presser and you can't go any higher than that, what do you end up doing? He just said they just pass away. There's nothing more we can do, and that just blew my mind.
What is it like for people trying to bring doctors into Gaza, protect their safety, and then get them out? And not only are you like entering and exiting a system in which you don't have any supplies like you described, but also you don't have information about the patient. You're just dealing with them and trying to do the best you can with what you have. But then you're getting swapped out. Like you were only there for 2 weeks. A lot of the doctors I've spoken to, same thing. They've only gone for 2 or 3 weeks maximum. Maybe they've come back 2-3 months later and they go again. But for the most part, it's doctors in and out. So by the time you get into a groove and you're like, okay, I think I can serve people under such circumstances to the best of my ability, but it's taken me 3 weeks to get used to it.
Yeah.
And then you leave.
Yeah.
So what do you think, what sort of effect does that have on the system?
I mean, obviously the continuity of care is completely gone. Day to day, different physicians, even Palestinian physicians who are manning the hospitals change. It's a free-for-all. There's like no continuity of care. It's very difficult for physicians to come in there and be able to kind of get the groove of things. Yeah, and I don't even think it's possible to kind of get used to it because it's such a shock to the system of how little they have. I mean, it's so desolate and so destroyed that it's impossible to describe. It's like night and day. The best way to describe it is like 1800s style medicine. They destroyed everything. There's no CT scans, there's no x-rays, there's no MRIs, there's no more cath lab. these are basic things that we have in the United States and Europe that are just not, you don't have access to them. You can't make a diagnosis. You can't treat patients. So it's very remedial medicine that's being practiced.
When you were at the clinic and these other hospitals, what was the situation like on the property itself? Because I know a lot of Palestinians either are just living at the hospital, like right outside, setting up camp, maybe because they have family members actually living in the hospital, or because they just think that it's safer to be near the hospital because the Israelis won't attack it. So when you were there, was it like that?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like we were in some ways far away from the intense fighting. I went in during Ramadan, and it seemed like it was like a less intense phase of the fighting compared to what we saw in December and January. But you still hear the bombing, and you still hear the shelling, and you still see the smoke on the horizon from where they hit. And Rafah was relatively calm up until that second week. And when they started, when the decision became clear that they were going to cross that red line that Biden had set and go into Rafah, and they started amassing their troops kind of near the Philadelphia corridor, the bombings got more intense. So
the living situation while you were there, did you guys have running water? Were you able to take showers? What kind of water did you drink? How about food?
Yeah, so we brought in our own food for us. We brought in our own water as well. We lived in an apartment building that was vetted by the UN, and the Israelis had the coordinates of that building, but that second week they were hitting all around that building. And it was just a regular family that let us use their home, and they were, I guess, getting a small amount of money for the rent for using that building. But they were just regular people. There was water. We were allowed to take a shower like every other day or every third day. There was electricity, but from the solar panels. So it would cut off at night.
And what was the weather like? I mean, was it hot during that time? Is it difficult to sleep? Like, I know for me, if I don't have air conditioning and a fan on, it's hard to sleep. So what was it like?
It was very mild weather when I went in March. It got coldish at night, but the days were like a mild, warm weather.
And could you guys hear the drones?
Oh, that's an endless noise. You hear it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you know when they're about to hit because you start hearing two of them. And they start circling right above your head or right near the area that you're at, and then you hear whoosh, and it comes in very quickly, and you hear the explosion of the bomb that just went off.
Wow, so you're saying that you can kind of get a heads up because they'll send two surveillance drones, and they sound like propeller planes, like a Cessna.
Yeah.
And they're just hovering around, and that's kind of a warning sign that there's about to be a strike here.
Yeah. No, when the sun set and you started hearing two drones above your head, you knew that something was going on. That, they either are planning to hit this area or will hit this area in the next day or so. But we would hear the drones, and when you heard two of them, they were going to hit.
Did you see any signs of the famine? Because there's a bit of a misconception when people hear that Gaza is on the verge of a famine or experiencing a famine. Obviously, the Zionists love to mock it and lie and pretend like there was no famine whatsoever, but there obviously was. We've seen videos of the settlers literally blocking the trucks from entering, and we know that Gaza before the war required X amount of trucks per day in order to service, every single person living in Gaza, and that number was drastically reduced. And even the drastically reduced number was cut because of these settlers blocking the trucks. So there's no doubt about the fact that there was a famine. But what people don't understand is that within the Strip, you had pockets of famine, that the famine wouldn't be everywhere all at once. It would be in this area for a couple weeks, in this area for a month or so. It depends. So did you see signs of the famine? Because one of the doctors I spoke to about a year ago, actually, who may have been in Gaza around the same time as you, told me that she said that she came across a boy and a girl who was trapped in their home. Their family had been killed, and their area was being besieged. and they eventually made it to the hospital, and she said that he looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks.
Yeah.
So did you see anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, everybody was, they looked malnourished. So they weren't eating an appropriate diet. I wouldn't say that the time that I spent in Rafah that it was to the level of a famine, because there was food. And at that time, the World Central Kitchen bombing happened the day that I left, which was April 1st. We heard the news as we were crossing Rafah. So they still had the distribution of food from the World Central Kitchen. And they would, you would see when it was time to have dinner, they would come around with tin foils worth of, with food and pass it out to everybody.
What do you mean tin foils worth of food?
They didn't have like big plates or anything to put it in, so they just put the rice inside of a tinfoil pile and wrapped the tinfoil together and distributed it to everybody. And it would say WCK on the top of it.
So was there any protein, or it's just literally rice?
It was rice and, a small amount of vegetables and then a few pieces of meat. Yeah. And it was meant for like 8 to 10 people.
Was there still like an economy during this time? I mean, so did you see any marketplaces? Could people go and buy something from the store? What did you see?
Yeah, so you could go, civilization has a way to survive through anything. And people will conduct business under the most dire circumstances. It's just the nature of being a human being, right? We conduct commerce, and that's how we do things. So they had markets. Everything was very expensive. Most of the price increases were due to the price increases coming in from suppliers from Israel or from Egypt, unfortunately. And these people still had contacts that they were allowing merchants to purchase truckloads worth of food and stuff to come in, very limited amount, and very limited amount of food, and the prices would be very expensive. I know the story has been that Hamas has been taking the aid and reselling it at exorbitant prices, but it was just the circumstances was the market was so condensed that it required the prices to be that high. It had nothing to do with, I think, Hamas stealing the aid.
Yeah, just basic supply and demand.
Yeah.
And I've heard, from people who raise money and they buy supplies in Egypt,
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that, unfortunately, there are people in Egypt taking advantage,
Mm-hmm.
and they know that these charities
Mm-hmm.
from America are raising a ton of money to buy supplies and send them into Gaza. So instead of charging $1 for an item, they'll charge 10.
Yeah.
And these trucks would end up costing like anywhere between $30,000 to $100,000 when there isn't more than like $10,000 worth of merchandise on there. So unfortunately, people on the Egyptian side have been profiting off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And their logic is, well, the Israelis are only letting X amount in, and all this money is coming from the very wealthy Western people.
Mm-hmm.
And we in Egypt are suffering, so we're going to take advantage of this. And we're not really denying the people of Gaza food. It's Israel who's doing so. So it's a very unfortunate thing to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you now about some of the craziest things you experienced or the scariest things that you saw while you were in Gaza.
From a patient care perspective, I saw a child that had her face burned pretty much all the way through. She was standing she was being carried outside of Al-Aqsa Hospital. We went there for 2 days when we were there. And she was in like an intense amount of pain and would not stop crying because of the amount of pain that she was in. So it was mesmerizing to see, a child suffering like that and no ability to help her. Yeah, that was like one of the saddest experiences that I saw. I think, she had ended up, her story got posted to Twitter and people ended up seeing what I saw, but it was very tragic.
Did she end up surviving?
I believe so. Yeah. The story that the caregiver that was holding her was that she was at Shifa Hospital and both of her parents died. So when they emptied Shifa Hospital that second time, that person carried her and took her with him to Al-Aqsa Hospital, and they came by foot. And they were living in the hallways of Al-Aqsa Hospital. there was nothing to do for her. I mean, there was no ability for her to get treated for her burns or to get a graft, for example. They just had dressings on her face and then cream for all the open sores that she had. It was very tragic.
Yeah, that's awful.
Everything that you see on social media is not even 1%. Yeah.
So Western medical organizations in America haven't really said anything about this crisis in Gaza, where they've done so for Ukraine. And with respect to the Ukrainian people, they have not experienced war like the people of Gaza have. The war in Ukraine is spent a lot of it, most of it actually is in the east, and a lot of it takes place in these open fields or in completely abandoned cities, Bakhmut being the most famous example. So the people of Ukraine, haven't suffered nearly as much as the people of Gaza. And I'm not trying to discount the suffering of the people of Ukraine. I'm just trying to point out that Western organizations will see what's happening in Ukraine and easily condemn it and say this is wrong and we need to do whatever we can for these people. But for Gaza, they've said nothing. So for you as a doctor, living in the West, working in the West, what is that like for you and your peers who are sympathetic to what's happening to the people of Gaza?
It's very hard to exist in a system that doesn't see you or your family or the people that you know personally back home as equal human beings. And some of it is ideological. Some people just are not on our side. And that, in some ways you can accept that. They're just not with us. They're against us, and that's okay. But some other people, the system we live in does not reward people who stand with Palestinians. It's very difficult to stand on the side of the Palestinian people. And, it's gotten easier to speak up over the last year or so, but people still face a lot of, difficulty, get fired from their jobs for speaking out and standing up with the Palestinian people. But until there's systemic change from the inside, until there's an enough amount of people who are within the medical system, physicians that are brave enough to stand up and speak up for the Palestinian people. I mean, hundreds of doctors have been killed in Gaza. These are people who come to the UK for training, and they're our colleagues, and they're getting killed endlessly. And we just have to speak up on their behalf and kind of break that barrier and change the discourse. It's very difficult to watch, the American Medical Association or whatever organization it is, just kind of turn a blind eye to it when the same thing in Ukraine gets endless backlash.
I've seen your posts on X. You're pretty active on X. You've had a lot of viral posts, and you've been doing what you can to contribute in this information war to spread the Palestinian narrative and stand up for your people. What is it like as a doctor? As you mentioned, there are people getting fired just for speaking out. So obviously you take the risk and you show your face, you have your name on there. And so that's quite risky. So do you know anyone who's experienced backlash? Are you worried that you yourself will experience backlash, potentially not be given a promotion or allowed to transfer to a certain hospital, get a certain job?
Yeah.
Are you worried of those kinds of things?
I mean, it's always a thought in the back of my mind, but I think at this point, it doesn't really matter. They've done so much to the people in Gaza that I think any retribution that I face or any other physicians face in the United States, it might be difficult, but it's not even 1% of what the people of Gaza face. If we want Palestine to be free, we have to do something for it. Everything costs something. So we're not going to free Palestine by being quiet. I think it's important for us to speak up, and we get fired, we get a new job, we figure it out, and we keep pushing through it until finally people realize we're not saying anything wrong. All we're saying is, it's not appropriate to drop bombs on tents and burn people alive. It's not appropriate to invade, a very small strip of land and annihilate as many people as Israel has done. There's nothing wrong in saying those things. And I think the mood is changing and the tide is shifting.
I hope so. I've been following Palestine for about 14 years now, and the only victories we can ever really point to is conversation is changing or we're raising awareness. And that's true. We have, and the conversation has changed, but the situation on the ground has actually changed as well, and it's changed for the worse. So Optimistic that hopefully in the long run this makes a difference. Sometimes things have to get better they have to get worse before they can get better.
Mm-hmm.
But things do look bleak, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I commend you for your bravery, not just in serving in Gaza, but for continuing to speak out as well, because you're absolutely right. If you want to free Palestine, if you want to produce any kind of change, you have to be willing to fight for it and suffer for it, ultimately. And I think the people of Gaza are the best example of the price you must pay for freedom. And they're not even asking for anything crazy. No. Obviously, the Israelis love to point to October 7th and gaslight, and they love to start the story there.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, they misrepresent what happened on October 7th anyway. They say that, babies were kidnapped and innocent people were killed, and they ignore the fact that the Israelis engaged in the Hannibal Directive, and they killed their own people in order to prevent them from being taken hostage. And, this is something admitted by the Israeli government. Like just the other day, 2 days ago, Israeli media reported on an Israeli military investigation where they confirmed without a doubt that this was a mass Hannibal Directive implemented. And it's all in response to the Palestinian people seeking their rights, independence, and wanting their own solution to this, a two-state solution. So let me ask you, as a Palestinian, what would you like to see for your people? A one-state solution, a two-state solution? Do you think you could ever live with the Israelis after what has been done? What are your opinions?
I think it would be ideal for us to establish a state, and under the current I'm a pragmatic person and I'm a realistic person, and the reality is that Israel has all the power, and that's just the fact that we can't escape right now. And they're backed by the greatest empire the world has ever seen, so that reality isn't going to change anytime soon, I don't think, at least. And I think the best thing for the Palestinian people is to establish a two-state solution. And these are things that all the political parties in Palestine have been open to. I mean, even Hamas has been open to the idea of a two-state solution along the 1967 borders. Israel doesn't want that. I don't think Israel wants the Palestinian people anywhere near them or to exist at all. And they just want all that land for themselves. And that's just the reality of the situation. It's not... I don't think it's a personal thing for them. I think if there were any other people there, they would have the same goal of just removing all those people from that land. And the Palestinian people have been displaced and killed for so many years that at this point, Gaza is the last stand for them. And I don't think a lot of people, no one is going to leave Gaza willingly, in my opinion. So I think establishing a two-state solution right now would be the most optimal thing, just to preserve our people, preserve what we have, and then move on.
Do you ever plan on going back to Gaza? Things potentially could flare up again, even if it doesn't. I mean, there's been a catastrophe there, and so they may need more assistance. Do you have plans to go back? Well,
I don't think I can go back, actually. They blocked all... the reason I didn't go back, I was planning on going back after March, but in July they put out a bulletin that no Palestinians or anyone with Palestinian heritage are allowed to be any of the humanitarian people entering into Gaza. So as of right now, I would be excluded from entering. So hopefully if they do withdraw from the border between Gaza and Egypt, I will be able to go back in because they don't have control over that reality.
Is there anything that you want the listeners to know? Some final thoughts about your experience in Gaza or just the situation in general regarding Israel-Palestine?
I think the best thing or the most important thing to know is they did everything that they said, or that we said that they were going to do. From the very beginning, we said this was not about October 7. This was never about the hostages. This was not even about Hamas. They had a plan from the beginning to annihilate Gaza to the point that it became unlivable. And we've been saying that since the beginning. And then after the pictures started coming out into the mainstream and the world started seeing the level of destruction in Gaza, they started saying, well, don't start a war. But we've been saying this from the beginning, that you shouldn't conduct a war like this. So everything that we've been saying since the very beginning just ended up becoming true, and now everybody knows it. I hope that people realize how deceptive Israel can be.
So I'd love to talk to you some more, but you've got a flight to catch.
Yeah.
So I just want to thank you for being here, and I hope the audience can enjoy, hopefully, this brief podcast. Usually we go on for about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Okay.
My most recent one with Raja Abdel-Haq was about 3 hours. So I'd love to sit here and talk to you some more, but it's a Friday and you got to catch a plane.
Yeah.
But it's been a pleasure to have you, and I hope that we can link up again, hopefully in Chicago, or if you ever go back to Palestine, maybe we can link up there, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah.
But I thank you for your service. Not to sound like cringe, but legitimately you risked your life to go help your people during one of their most trying times, and you did so at the expense of potentially risking your entire career here in America working in medicine. So thank you for that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and protect you, inshallah, and liberate the people of Palestine.
Inshallah. Thank you for everything you do as well. Brother.